Alright, today we're going to make a replica of a Cossor tube. This is they call it a tin hat tube. It's made back in the 20s. The plate has got kind of a cup-shaped, I mean, you know, back then they just didn't have too much common sense. But it makes these very rare tubes. And I just happened to be able to borrow this one to use as a model. And the grid is it's shaped kind of the same as the plate. It just kind of goes and curls over inside there. And then the plate is the cap, and then the filament is just a single strand going kind of in a U-shaped up inside. So we'll go ahead and make up those things and seal it up and see if we can make one of these. This is a dud. It's no good. Filament's open. But we'll go ahead and make some good ones. Have a friend who has a radio that uses them, and we'll make him up a set of them so he can get his radio working. Alright, first off we have to make the envelope. Clear the end of this a little bit. Blow a hole in the end. Got a little bitty hole here. I'm going to have to seal it off. Use a little piece of straw here. We got a little hole. Just seal the hole off. We're a little bit small in diameter, so we're going to blow it out just a little bit. Alright, cut it off. Okay, there's one envelope. Alright, next we have to make the bottom flare. This is the part that seals the bottom of the envelope. Okay, the plate of the tube is rounded in both directions, so what we're going to have is a cavity of some kind that we can swedge a piece of sheet steel into to get that shell shape. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use a milling cutter that we've ground into the shape of the tube itself, of the outer case, and then we'll just feed that into a block of plastic and we'll use that to make the cavity. Okay? All right. That looks pretty good. We'll give it a try. Okay, you can see how we've cut that? We have a cavity in there. It's rounded off in the same shape that tube should be, the plate should be. Now what we'll do is we'll make a piece that will fit into there, and we'll put a piece of sheet steel on there and we'll press it down into there, and that should form us a cup. That's the shape of the plate. Okay, let's make the piece that goes down into there. Okay, we'll use a piece of bar stock, aluminum bar stock, to make the piece out of. The first thing we'll do is we'll cut it to approximately the right thickness. Alright, now we've got the correct width. Now we're going to round it off so that it'll fit down in. It fits very nicely. Okay, so now I'm just going to continue taking that down. I'm just going to cut it right off of there. See, now that fits right down in there. So if we put a sheet of steel here, or thin metal, and we take this and we press it down, it'll make it into that cup shape. Hopefully. We'll see. Okay, now what I've got, I took a piece of nickel sheet here, this sheet nickel, and I've got it over the cutout. And I'm now going to take the vise and I'm just going to press it into place. Hopefully. I've never done this before. There she goes. Okay. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just crushing it down in there with the vise. There's our little plate. Compare, we see that the one in the tube is a little bit deeper. Okay, so what we're going to have to do, the next one we make, we're going to machine about maybe 50% deeper than this one here. Okay? Okay, now the grid, here's a picture of how it is. There's like a metal band that's made in the shape of the plate, and then the grid is made in loops of wire that hump over it, and they're supported on another wire that is going across the center. So we make this metal band here to be a square that's slightly smaller than the size of the plate, and then we go ahead and put the support wire, and then we take fine wires and weld them in for the grid. Alright, first we have to find some metal. Okay, so here I've taken a small piece of metal, it's about 1/8 of an inch, and I bent it into a rectangle that just fits with our plate. Okay, now that's going to be the base of the grid, and then we'll have our support wire across the top, and then our grid wires going around. Okay, the next thing to do is to make up the grid. Okay, the support wire, we're just going to use a piece of 20 mil nickel wire. This is actually nickel steel wire. It's a mixture of nickel and steel. And I'm just going to bend that into a nice little curve here. And that has to fit up inside here. That's going to be perfect. Okay, and then that alright, we'll weld that one. Okay. Okay, and that gives us our grid holder. Okay, this will have to be very, very low current. Okay, cut it off about there. Then we'll bend them around after we get them on here. See how it looks? Okay, now we're going to take these wires and we're going to bend them around. Hopefully. They're very soft. This is very soft nickel wire. Extremely soft. It's called dead soft nickel wire. Okay. The first one. Okay, and there's our grid. See, and that fits up in there like that. Okay, and then we have to make our filament, which will go as an arc, in an arc around inside the grid. Okay? Alright, next thing we have to do is we make up the electrodes. These are the seals. We have a piece of tungsten wire and we have a piece of copper wire with a piece of, not tungsten, we have a piece of nickel wire and a piece of tungsten wire for the seal and then a piece of copper wire. And the tungsten is what seals through the glass. The copper wire is used to have a flexible lead. So we'll first weld the tungsten onto the nickel. Okay, and we'll make 12 of those. Okay, now we have all of the tungsten welded to the nickel. Now we go ahead and weld the tungsten onto the copper. And that gives us our finished electrode. So we have a copper wire for the lead going outside the tube, we have the tungsten seal, and then we have the nickel for supporting the elements inside the tube. Okay, next we have to get the elements ready to clamp. Not the elements, the electrodes. Okay, we're going to start with an active. And then we're going to put a support, then another active, and then Another active. Take the tape. Okay, and that just holds them in place so that when we do the melting into the seal glass, it holds them in position. Okay. Okay, the first thing we have to do, see, we're going to take these wires and we're going to make the seal. First thing we have to do is we have to take the round part and we have to flatten it down. We do that with a carbon blade. This is just a carbon blade, and we'll go ahead and heat the glass, put the blade in there and squish it down on it to get it to where it's more the shape that we want. Now, before we seal them, we have to take the tungsten and heat it white hot to drive the air out of it. This gets rid of any trapped air in the tungsten, and that makes it to where it doesn't form bubbles. I'm just heating them to red hot, just very shortly. Don't overdo it or it'll melt the copper off. That'll be a disaster. Have to remake it. Okay, now I'm going to take the nickel, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to heat it up, and that's going to drive the air out of the nickel so we don't get bubbles, or at least we get lesser bubbles. Okay, now we got a little plate here where we don't have any glass, so I'm going to go ahead and just fill that in. I'm just taking a piece of glass rod and I'm just going to go ahead and put some glass over this area where we don't have it. The other side looks pretty good. Right there. Okay, now we're going to do the seal itself. We've got the wires in position. We've got glass on all of them. Now we heat it to very hot and pinch it. And that makes the seal. I just squish down very hard on the glass. burn off that tape glue so that it isn't on the seal. Okay, and there's our seal. Okay, now we'll go ahead and we'll test it in the leak detector, make sure it's good. Alright, we're doing a leak test. We'll take each one of these and test it. Got the helium blowing here, and I just go into the seal area. We don't see any movement at all on the gauge, so that one's perfect. Alright, here's the third one. That was not good. Look at that. Now, that one's got a leak. Alright, we got one of them with a leak. Now, the first thing we have to do is get the length of the wires so that the tube itself is going to end up with the plate right in the top. If we look at our model tube, we see that the plate is right up in the curve of the envelope. So we want to go ahead and do ours the same way. That means we have to choose the length of the wires so that the plate will weld and be at the right height. So I'm going to go ahead and eyeball it first. Okay, and I'm going to cut them. I'm going to cut them right where the carbon is there. Okay. Now, to facilitate welding on the wires, I'm going to scrape them with a knife to get the oxide off them from heat when we were doing the glass work. It needs a little bit of corrosion on the wires. We'll just scrape that off so that the wire will weld better. Now, first thing we're going to do, we have to get the plate and grid leads out of the way. We're going to put the filament first, so we have to get the plate and the grid leads out of the way. So I'm just going to grab them at the base and I'm going to bend them out so that they're not in the way when we're working on the filament. Okay? And then the grid will do the same way. I'm going to bend the grid in the opposite direction. These are the wires that will connect to the grid. I'm just going to get them out of the way. Being very careful not to break the glass. Okay. Now, these two in the center are the filament wires. I hope. Yeah, they are. And I'm going to bend them and spread them out. Okay. And then bring them up. And I'll make sure that's the right width. Okay, we're a little too close together. We want to get the width of the filament so that it's about the width of the grid inside. So I'm going to take them and play with them a little just to get them wider. Put that one right there. And I'll bring the other one out a little bit too. The right position. Okay, it's going to be just right. Okay, now we're going to fasten the filament onto these two. Now to do that, we're going to bend the wire over and crimp it onto the tungsten wire. But we don't want to use round wire to do the crimp, because if you take two round pieces that are like that, when you crimp them together, it forms a tight spot and it'll cut that tungsten wire just like it was a wire cutter's. So what we're going to do is we're going to flatten out the wires so that when we crimp it, it has no tendency to cut. See, what I'm doing is just flattening the end of it. That way when we pinch it around onto the tungsten, it'll have no tendency to cut the tungsten. And we'll just take the very end and we'll bend it around. Okay, and that makes just a little hook on the end there. All right, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to put the filament itself on. Okay, we have a roll of filament wire here. This is 3 mil thoriated tungsten wire. You probably won't see it in the camera because it's so fine. Okay, I'm going to put the end of it in the little hook that we made, and I'm going to just take and crimp down to grab it. Okay? Now, I'm going to make a hoop in the filament, and that we want to be approximately the same as the grid. Okay. And that gives us our little filament. Okay, cut that off. Okay, we have here a mixture of barium and strontium carbonate mixed with water with a small amount of sodium silicate as a binder, and it's mixed up to be about like maybe applesauce. You might call it like applesauce. It's thick and creamy, like a heavy cream. Okay, we just take a brush, very small enough drop on it, and I'm just going to paint it onto the wire. I'm just dabbing it on the wire. Okay, now I'm going to pass it through the flame. I've got the flame there. I'm not going to heat it up to where it changes state from carbonate into oxide. I just want to dry it. Okay, now I'm going to go with another layer. You can probably see it pretty well in the camera now. You can see how white it is. And we'll put one more layer on there. We don't want too much. Okay, and that gives us our filament. You can see the filament. Okay, the next thing we have to do is mount the grid. Okay, to do that, we have to bend the supports up to where they can weld onto the bottom of the grid. Okay, so I'll go ahead and grab the support wire, bend it up, being very careful. All right. Have to be careful not to break the glass down below. Okay, now the grid is going to be approximately like that, so I'm going to cut these off. Right at the top. Wow. All right, now the next thing that has to be done is to position grid perfectly. Now that one worked fine, okay? Get that, position the filament exactly. See, we can't have the filament touching. Okay, that's beautiful. Okay. Here goes. Okay. In spite of all the difficulties, it's in there. Now, that will go up inside there like that. Okay. All right, the next thing we have to do, we have to put a getter . Wow, isn't that something? Amazing. Okay. It's all fit together perfectly. Okay, the next thing to do is to seal it into the tube. We're going to go ahead and seal the bottom, and then we'll be ready to evacuate it. Alright, we got the tube mounted in the lathe, and we'll go ahead first and we'll preheat it using the annealing torch. That'll be good enough. Okay. That is so perfectly positioned, I'm going to put it right the way it is. I'm just using a carbon rod to push the glass over when I heat it. Okay. That's on one side, we've got it. Alright, now we're just going to go on around and seal it on. I'm just melting the glass together. Okay, next, I've got the blowpipe hooked onto it. I'm going to put a little pressure on it, and I'm going to pump out that seal. Okay, and that's it. Alright, we just let that cool and put it on the vacuum system. Alright, here we have the first tube. It's almost fully processed. The filament has been processed by heating it to a little bit over temperature. That changes the carbonate into oxide, and then we leave it sit on the pump to go ahead and outgas even longer. It's been about 6 hours now pumping. I'm going to heat it one more time to drive gas out of it, and then seal it off. Just using the annealing torch, I'm just heating the envelope up to, it's probably going to be 1,000 degrees or so. And that does a final little bit of outgassing, gets rid of any last little bit of gas that happens to be trapped in the glass. After sitting there for 8 hours on the pump, there's not much left in it. And the getter will easily take care of anything that happens to be there. Okay, now I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to use the induction heater to heat the plate. That takes any extra gas that's in it, drives it out. Takes only a matter of seconds when it's red hot. Okay, we're ready to seal the tube off. First thing we do is we flash the getter. Right now I'm just outgassing it, heating it up barely to red hot. This drives the gas out of it, and then the pump pumps it away. Alright, now we're going to flash it. Okay. I'm going to heat the glass up. The vacuum will scrunch it in. Start to scratch. There she goes. Okay, there it is. Okay. That's our first one. Success.